Okay, so you might be watching this video cast as part of your preparation for this section of the gender specification, or perhaps you're watching it as part of your revision. This video cast covers the AO1 content of the role of chromosomes and hormones in gender. It doesn't cover the evaluation section. So you'll remember that the biological approach assumes that all behaviour has some kind of biological basis, and that's basically what the biological explanations and approach to explaining gender behaviour would claim. It proposes that being male or female, so our biological sex, is what determines our gender identity of being more masculine or perhaps more feminine. So it assumes that all of our behaviours and all of our psychological characteristics and traits and all of the social differences that we see between males and females are due to some kind of underlying biological aspect, particularly in this particular area of the spec, our chromosomal and our hormonal differences. The key terms that are written on your specification that you need to be aware of are the words chromosomes and hormones, and your specification also identifies the specific hormones of testosterone, estrogen and oxytocin. Because these words are written on your specification, they can ask you direct questions about any of these concepts. So make sure that you have a good understanding of the chromosomal differences between males and females and these different hormones that exist in males and females and how they have an impact on gender behaviour. So we're going to start off with the role of chromosomes and how that relates to hormonal differences between males and females. I'm sure you're already all aware that within each of our cells, in the nucleus of each of our cells, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and we've inherited those chromosomes, half from our mothers and half from our fathers. So there's a little picture that kind of illustrates the chromosomes on the top right hand side of the screen there. Each chromosome contains or is made up of a series of genes, and obviously these genes on each of the chromosomes have coding that determines our traits and to some extent our behaviours. Now the 23rd pair of chromosomes, you will notice there's some differences. So you can either have XY or XX. And it's these chromosomes, this 23rd pair of chromosomes, that determine our biological sex. So if you're a male, you have the combination XY, or if you're a female, you have the combination XX. So this diagram just explains that process and how that comes about and what the impact of those chromosomal differences might be on males and females. So if we follow the top part of the diagram initially, you can see that there is an ovum that would be in the mother, and that gets fertilised by a sperm carrying a Y chromosome. The combination of the X egg in the ovum and the Y sperm creates a zygote that is XY. Now, as the zygote develops within the womb of the mother, the Y chromosome has a specific area called the sex-determining region Y on it. And that causes the embryonic gonads to form into testes. And once the testes are formed, they start to release testosterone, which is obviously the male androgen hormone, which determines physical and potentially psychological traits of being male. The same process applies at the bottom, so let's just follow the one at the bottom. So this time again there's an X egg in the ovum. It's always X eggs in the ovum, and what determines whether or not the zygote becomes a male or a female is which type of sperm fertilised the egg. So in this second occasion, the sperm this time is carrying an X chromosome, and that combination of XX creates a female zygote. This means that there is no Y chromosome to change the embryonic gonads into testes, so they continue to develop into ovaries. Once the ovaries are starting to form, the zygote starts to produce estrogen, and obviously it continues to produce estrogen through the female's life, and that's what develops the female physical traits and also potentially the behavioural traits of being a woman. So according to these two processes, it's the underlying biological sex, so the nature of being XY for male or XX for female, that is what determines your masculinity potentially as a male and your femininity as a female. So the biological approach assumes that it's your sex that determines your gender identity and behaviour. So by being male, that obviously has an impact on the hormones that are produced. The common male hormone or androgen hormone is the hormone of testosterone. As we saw on the previous diagram, testosterone is released in the male before the male is even born. So from 8 weeks of development, testosterone is being released around the body of the developing embryo. And that obviously influences the development of the male internal and external genitalia. So we talked about it changing the gonads into testes. But obviously those influences of testosterone don't just occur prenatally, they also occur postnatally. So during the child's early development and again through puberty, it has an impact on the development of the male characteristics. Importantly, however, testosterone doesn't just affect the kind of physical genitalia areas, it also has an impact on the development of the brain. So testosterone can influence the masculinization of the brain. Certain areas develop more and other areas develop less. So, for example, testosterone helps to develop areas linked to spatial awareness and spatial development. This is why it's argued that our biological sex, which is obviously being XY in a male's case, has an impact on the hormones being released, which then has an impact on the types of male behaviours seen, such as having good spatial awareness due to the changes in the brain, perhaps being more aggressive and potentially more competitive. Females do possess testosterone, but it's significantly lower proportions compared to men. So females have only about 10% of the testosterone that is found in males. For females, one of the most predominant sex hormones is estrogen. Like the males, this is influencing the development of both internal and external genitalia, and this is again happening prenatally. So estrogen is flowing around the developing embryo's body and affecting the development of the ovaries. Obviously, estrogen also continues to get released throughout the infant and the person's life, which affects those secondary male characteristics and also, as you know, has a key role in the menstruation cycle. In terms of estrogen being released prenatally, this is also thought to feminize the brain. What seems to be related to estrogen production is that there's more interconnections across the two hemispheres. You'll remember that the two hemispheres are connected by that bundle of fibres called the corpus callosum. And the estrogen has an influence on those synaptic connections across the two hemispheres of the brain. So perhaps this is why people who are female, are able to do more multitasking. They have an ability to interconnect ideas and themes and thoughts across the two sides of the brain more easily and more readily. This is why also sex is thought to link to gender female behaviours. So estrogen has been linked to being more emotional, perhaps more irritable as a result of its influence on the menstruation cycle, and perhaps also being involved in more sensitivity and empathy and potentially more cooperation. Males are also seen to have very small amounts of estrogen, but again, in comparison to females, this is very low levels. The final hormone that you need to be aware of is a hormone called oxytocin. This is commonly referred to as the love hormone. And the reason it's released or referred to as the love hormone is that it is produced in large quantities in both males and females during amorous activities. So it's the intimacy that you experience is a result of a surge of oxytocin. Now, for females, there is also huge amounts of oxytocin released during and after childbirth. It's actually what initiates childbirth, and it gets released in huge amounts after childbirth as well, in order to connect the mother to the child. So it's linked heavily in the bonding behaviour that occurs between a mother and her new infant. It also is responsible for stimulating lactation, so for breastfeeding, to again ensure that bonding and that closeness between the mother and the child. It's obviously, as you can see there, released in much higher levels in females, and it's thought to be linked with those kind of bonding behaviour, that intimacy behaviour, and perhaps also those more typical females like nurturing and caring. So all of these hormones seem to be linked to what would be typically feminine or masculine behaviours. And this is why the biological approach to gender, so the influence of chromosomes and hormones, are thought to be inextricably linked with our gender identity and our gender behaviours. So, just to sum up, the biological approach makes a claim that our sex determines our gender identity. Because of the differences in our chromosomes, so XY for males and XX for females, that has an impact on the hormones that we experience prenatally and postnatally. And it's these levels of hormones that are thought to direct our gender identity and behaviour.